I have all year. A couple of questions, and of course this is couched in the fact that 80% of the energy that is used by our federal government is used by the Department of Defense. The vast majority of that is used for operational activities, and like 94% of that is petroleum fuel. So getting this right, we have the ability not just to revolutionize the federal government, but certainly our country, industry, and the planet. One of the things that struck me was in the report, and this is from Mr. Solis, that cited the department's lack of established incentives or a viable funding mechanism for investing in these fuel reduction projects. The department in its official line said they're not convinced that financial incentives represents the best strategy to reduce fuel usage. When I think about how much money that we're spending on contractors, is this something that could be perhaps used under existing or future logistics contracts in terms of getting them to move towards energy consumption?
Again, I don't know that you need separate contracts. I think what we were talking about there in terms of a funding mechanism or incentives. First, a funding mechanism. Again, there's not a separate line. It mostly, from our view, is mostly supplemental. Again, the forward locations now that we're talking about. If you do look at the installation side here in CONUS, there are a lot of funding mechanisms. There are things in the MILCON budget that allow for energy improvements in terms of looking at how you can get returns on investment and save fuel and reduce fuel and energy demands. There may be some other means of doing that. I'm not sure necessarily by contracting you necessarily have to do it, but what there has to be certainly is something out there that says, here are the priorities of the department, here's what we're going to fund, here's how we're going to do it.
I would be interested in working with members of the committee specifically to talk about why it is that we have not heard from the Obama administration about implementing Section 902 from the last Defense Authorization Act, because I think having this coordinator could be really a key position for us. And so if we can talk later on that, Mr. Chairman. Following the lines of what was talked about in Mr. Schaefer's beginning comments about the Eskimo spray program, I mean, this seems to be like a total no-brainer. Obviously, it works, what, 40 to 70% conservation or energy reduction. Why is it that we are not immediately expanding this to all temporary facilities, permanent facilities, and even bases here? I come from southern Arizona. It gets to be 110, 120 degrees. It seems to me that we should be using this foam everywhere.
Thank you, ma'am. The first answer is we are reinitiating the contract in Iraq and looking to do a contract in Afghanistan. So I think that we are cleaning up the CENTCOM area of responsibility. The other answer is, why aren't we doing this everywhere here? You know, that's a very good question. Now, there is a mechanism to do this, because I've done the return on investment calculations, and these types of things will pay for themselves fairly quickly. Under the Energy Conservation Investment Program, ESIP, a local base commander has the opportunity to work with a commercial firm to go ahead and make those changes locally, because at the end of the day, a local base commander pretty much owns their base facility. We've made the information available to them. We meet in an energy forum with the leaders of each of the services. I can take back specifically your comments to both the Air Force and the Army. I don't know if you have any Navy bases in Arizona, but I can take it back directly to the Air Force and Army and ask that question directly of them.
And not just in Arizona. I mean, obviously, I mean everywhere,
sure,
but specifically
absolutely.
in areas that makes the most sense is when, you know, even though those areas that have climate similar to Iraq and Afghanistan, it seems to me if we get this right here, obviously we can deploy that technology more easily. And following up, you had talked about the TIGR program. There's also that transportable hybrid electric power station. Solar is big in Arizona. Yep. Can you talk about some of the successes of that? I understand that that there was a program that was tested. It was tested at one point, but then during the GAO study, it was determined that it was not ready for deployment in Iraq.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. The THEPS program, Tactical High Energy, or the Tactical Transportable High Energy System, had some wonderful technology and would have worked very, very nicely in a fixed location. When you get to packaging it up and taking it apart, the system just didn't hold up to the rigors of packaging and deployment. So we have the Power Surety Task Force, and by the way, that particular program spun off a 4 to 5 year development program called High Power, where we're looking at ruggedizing those technologies that we can and getting them out as fast as possible. The THEPS also gave rise to the Joint Capability Technology Demonstration Net Zero project, which includes transportable and tactical solar powers. And it's fascinating because I have seen this whole group come along to where they were just kind of almost jury-rigged type solar panels, to now we're able to almost roll them out in a fabric. Again, we're not there yet, but we're getting very close, and the manufacturing capability for solar firms is stepping up to try to give us a more rugged and viable capability. And if I can go back to one question you asked earlier about the spray foaming. We really stumbled upon that, the Power Surety Task Force, and deployed it to Fort Irwin. Now, as we bring it Fort Irwin, we're bringing through the battalions and brigades that are going over to Iraq. Those soldiers and commanders are seeing the value of spray foaming, and they're bringing it back to their location. So I think this is a technology that will grow because it works.
One final question, Mr. Chairman. SERP funds were used in nearly 24 projects in Iraq. Did you have a chance, Mr. Solis, during your investigations to determine whether or not they worked, either personally or anecdotally? Do we have good information about how those dollars unrolled and what type of technology exactly was used?
I'm sorry, did you say SERP funds? We've done some work on that, but I am not familiar with that. I would have to probably, take that for the record if I could.
Mr. Schaefer?
Ma'am, I'll do the same thing. I'll take that one for the record because I don't have that data with me.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, obviously the potential here is tremendous, and I just want to make sure that with the new administration that we're working together to take this technology. I mean, when you look at the numbers, it's astounding. We should be able to make sure that, particularly with solar, which is becoming more and more cost effective, that we are putting it in Iraq and Afghanistan and making it as easy to use as possible.
I appreciate your comments. Sometimes we look at ammunition and body armor, but I think this is a very, very important issue that we have to address. If you don't have the fuel, you can't protect our soldiers by not utilizing the airplanes or the helicopters. But you're right, this has been a very, very interesting. But let me yield to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cradaville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, let me just tell you, one of the most difficult things getting used to as a former prosecutor is waiting to answer these questions. It's always nice when it's a smaller group, so thank you. Mr. Solis, let me start with you, if I may. I know the report gives 5 recommendations. What we seem to come back to